Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Adam King Show. I am your host, Adam King, joined by the one and only Rock Breath, my personal McMahon. Welcome to the show. We got an unbelievable show for you guys. Before we get started, I want to ask Rock, how you been, man? How's the week by you?
It's been good. I've been fantastic. My football team, the Bills, won last night. They didn't cover the spread, but you know, they won. I know they were dominating the game and then just fell apart. But I'm doing fantastic.
I got to tell you, Rock, we got such shows in the pipelines. Today's show is incredible. We have some amazing leaders of our country coming to talk about stuff they never get to talk about. And it's just exciting, man. The Adam King Show's blowing up. We're doing it, man.
Without a doubt, without a doubt.
And we have had home run after home run after home run.
For sure. I'm scheduling. I'm very, very excited for you, Adam.
Rock, we got such a show. I'm going to jump straight into the meme segment, and then we're going to get into the show. But before we go into the memes, I want to share with you something that got advertised to me on Instagram. Look at this game. This is a real game that was sent to me on Instagram that I download, where they portray the capitalist as lazy, corrupt, and greedy, and the communist as hardworking, loyal, and powerful. This is a real game that's available on the iTunes, on the Apple Store. Can you believe that shit?
No, it's sad. That's sad because we all know that any level of capitalist is going to be the hardest working in the country.
Exactly. This world is brought about by people who work hard for their living. Listen, we had a crazy week, and the two biggest headline stories that I could think about are Elon Musk buying Twitter, closing the deal. Without even 48 hours, he puts fact checks on President Biden. It's about time that the story has changed.
Oh, yeah.
And now comedy is now legal on Twitter, says His Excellency Elon. Heartbroken progressives forced to resort to old-fashioned technique of not reading tweets they don't like. Or suffering liberals, right?
That's great.
And for the love of God, buy Facebook also, man. I hate Facebook, but I really want him to buy Instagram because I love Instagram, and I know I'll blow up on Instagram if we can get little Zuckerberg over there.
I don't think you can have one without the other, though, Adam.
This guy owns Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. They got to break up that monopoly.
That's true.
This is and now and now that we don't have any censorship to worry about on Twitter, I wonder what's going to come out with Hunter Biden's laptop finally.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Happy Halloween, everybody. When the scent of Johnson's baby shampoo hits just right.
Oh, that's so
Come
good.
on, man. Come on, man. This one just got me good. I couldn't help. This one was just too much. And on the other news, Paul Pelosi and his homosexual lover. I don't understand the story at all. This one just blows my mind. The third most powerful family in the United States. They don't have security cameras. They don't have armed security. Dude walks in underwear at 2 a.m. with a hammer, and they're sitting there beating each other up half naked. And what's amazing is this guy gets off. You know, Rock, he had a DUI about 3 months ago where he injured somebody severely. And in the process,
we've seen that happen since the 60s with Kennedy. And you know how many were not, you know how many were not even mentioned or seen, period? There's probably thousands.
It's an embarrassment, Rock.
It's sad.
It's an absolute embarrassment, and our leaders deserve the same kind of prosecution.
Adam, let's give them fair due, though. They're human. However, to cover it up is not. That's where it's wrong.
The cover,
people make mistakes, but to cover it up, that's bad.
So Pelosi, stop drinking and driving, and stop beating up your boyfriends with hammers. Leaked photograph of Paul Pelosi's attacker. It's none other than Hunter Biden in underwear. New York Patriot runs in. Paul Pelosi crime scene leaked video.
Oh no.
You know, it's kind of crazy because this South Park character over here, doesn't it look like Paul Pelosi?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It actually looks like him. Let's see what we got next. More from the Pelosi crime scene video. And Mary Vaught, Tim runs his mouth. So the third most powerful person in American politics doesn't even have surveillance cameras around her house. Good point, Mary Vaught. Tim runs his mouth also marked himself safe on Facebook from having a hammer fight in his underwear today. This one kills me, man. Don't worry, man. We'll find your missing daughter. Joe Biden is sniffing his way to find her.
Oh, boy.
No thanks. I support the government when offered a brain.
Oh, no.
65,000 for gender studies. PragerU comes in. And now what is a woman? Guess your gender studies degree means nothing. Ever notice how dogs only come in male and female and cutting off the balls doesn't make it a female? My girlfriend said I was a pedophile. I said, that's a pretty big word for a 9-year-old.
Yeah, well, real quick, I found a golf ball and it has him on there, and underneath it says, "Help, I'm lost."
Funny. And then for our Halloween edition, trick-or-treaters, we rang the doorbell 3 times. And since we're doing the weed episode, I figure let's do some weed memes.
Good.
The morning after you hook up with the girl wearing the sluttiest costume.
Oh, God.
Students for Trump, they love it when you dress in drag, but when a little kid dresses as an Indian, nope, thank you. And Wall Street bets with the kilt. Be sure to check your kids' Halloween candy. My friend Chad found the worst financial advice ever inside of his Snickers. From Jim Cramer, we like Coinbase to 475. That was a tank. And I love the meta. It's so big. And now Facebook has collapsed.
For sure. We're looking forward to that.
Anyways, that concludes our meme segment. I'm going to bring in our guests.
Excellent.
We have an unbelievable show filled with some of the most amazing people in American politics today. So thank you for our segment. I'll catch you on the flip side, Rock. And,
thanks, guys.
I'll see
have
you
a great show.
I'll see you in the back set.
You got it. See you soon.
All right. Take it easy. All right. To all of the wonderful listeners out there, we have an amazing show set up. And this show is all about cannabis today. And we have some of the greatest leaders in cannabis, as well as some of the greatest leaders in our country. We are joined none other than the world famous, infamous Roger Stone for his second time on our show. Roger, thank you so much for being here with us today. How's it been?
Great to be here. You know, it's always better to be infamous than never be famous at all.
Sounds like Niccolo Machiavelli to me. I'm with that. And in addition to Roger, we have one of my most inspirational CEO in cannabis, Matt Anderson, the CEO of Vanguard Scientific. This guy's like the Tim Cook of cannabis, everybody. Look for this guy. Matt, where are you calling in from today, Matt?
Hey, Adam, calling in just south of Portland. Thanks for having me. Glad to be a part of the show.
Yeah, we're really lucky to have you with your travel schedule. Matt's been traveling all over the world, building all sorts of opportunities in cannabis. And in addition, we complete our panel with one of America's greatest cannabis activists, the longest standing dispensary in the United States. This guy's done so much for cannabis. Jason Beck, welcome to the show. Oh, we got to get your mic on, Jason. You're muted. Nope, we lost your audio. All right, well, we got technical problems, so we're just gonna go ahead. Jason, as soon as you figure out your audio, just jump in. So, guys, I want to talk about this episode is a very special episode because we're not focusing on politics as normal. We're focusing on cannabis, and we have. Roger, I think it's amazing that you're joining us on the show because so much America only sees your opinion on January 6th or Donald Trump or all this other craziness that's going on. And it's almost like they get to determine what we get to hear from Roger Stone. So it's amazing to have you on the show to speak about cannabis. an issue that unites both the left and the right. And I'm happy that America finally gets to hear some of your viewpoints on cannabis. You and I have talked about it a lot, about deregulation, and you wrote that article for me about a year ago. Why don't you give us a little bit of background about your experience in cannabis and why you're so passionate about it?
Well, first of all, of course, I'm a libertarian conservative. I've been first for decriminalization and for outright legalization for more than 30 years. People say, well, wait a minute, that's inconsistent with your support for Richard Nixon, who launched the war on drugs. I would make 2 points. First of all, I've written in 3 different books that I think this was among Nixon's larger mistakes. But even then, the war on drugs, as envisioned by my mentor, Richard Nixon, was focused at drug dealers, drug traffickers, drug kingpins. And of course, in 1969, a lot less was known about the medicinal value of cannabis because the big pharma and big government would never spend the money to actually scientifically study the values of cannabis. And even when it was studied, it was never studied properly. So in 1969, we didn't know the medicinal value. It was much later, 30 years until 1994, that the war on drugs changes entirely. And under Senate Judiciary Chairman Joe Biden and President Bill Clinton, for the first time, you have the harsh mandatory penalties for the first time nonviolent crime of possession, small amounts of drugs for personal use. This is where I think the war on drugs really goes off the tracks. So for 30 years, I've been writing about, marching about, pushing for first decriminalization, because I believe in the politically possible, but ultimately for legalization. I think to a certain extent, our efforts have actually sadly been helped by the opioid crisis in America, because only an idiot would not understand that opioids are far, far more dangerous than cannabis. So in a certain sense, I think it has helped propel the movement forward. The only other comment I guess I'd make at the top is this is an issue that potentially unites the left and the right. But I must tell you, I had a very bad experience in Los Angeles. I spoke to a conference on cannabis in New York. I was very well received. I denounced Nixon's war on drugs. It was his second biggest mistake. Taking us off the gold standard was probably his biggest mistake. But then when I went to speak to a similar gathering in Los Angeles, there was a giant boycott because there are certain people on the left who think they own this issue. I'm sorry, nobody owns the issue of cannabis. It's been around for 2,000 years. It's medicine. Nobody owns it.
Right.
And I've had mixed experiences. In any event, at this conference, there was a giant boycott. The conference hosts uninvited me. So I rented the hall across the street and I had a rally of 1,000 people where I spoke in favor of cannabis, paid for it myself.
Amazing. Yeah, and that brings us to the topic of decriminalization, and this is something that's very, Matt and I got a chance to speak for about an hour before last week, and this is something that he's very passionate about. It's kind of crazy that there are people out there making millions of dollars right now in legal cannabis, while there's still people sitting in jail for smoking a joint for 10, 15 years ago. So Matt, what are some of the efforts that you're working on in decriminalization in cannabis?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think that, what Roger spoke to is absolutely right. There's an underlying efficacy for this plant, whether you want to call it medicine or therapy. There's a lot of different lexicon that can be used, but the headline is it works. It works for a range of ailments. It also works as, relaxation, or what you would call a leisure product. When you move past the ingestible side of the plant, the utility of it in regards to fast fiber or plastic substitutes, applying a political lens, you begin to understand maybe what happened during that Nixon era and concerns around the productivity or the utility of this plant and some of the other industries that might be so heavily affected because of it. Specifically around nonviolent drug offense or possession or, misdemeanor crimes around possession of cannabis, it is a little crazy. And look, we all got here through a series of action and choices that were made. So I'm not looking to throw stones into the past and say I could have done it better. But, I think on average, it's about $140.
Let's be honest, Matt, we could have done it better.
Adam, under your helm, I think anything's possible. But, when you think about it is roughly the same price of a Holiday Inn Express, for one inmate to spend one night on average around $140 in prison. The amount of monies that are being spent to kind of preserve what we're already seeing change so drastically in the marketplace, it is the time to see, again, Roger renting out a facility and filling it full of thousands of folks to be able to create room for this conversation. It might not be easy to have. It might not be a straight path forward, but, change is required.
And wouldn't that be nice, though, if like people can look at someone like Roger, who's a very galvanizing figure, and say, oh, but he's into weed. So let's sit down and let's smoke a joint and let's talk about it. And maybe we could find some common ground in America to move the country forward. I think that weed could be a galvanizing thing that really brings us together. And I think we got Jason's mic finally working. Jason, can you give us a little check really quick?
Yeah, how's that sound, Adam?
There he is. Now, guys, I
All
want to
right.
introduce you to Jason Beck because he's one of the biggest activists in our country for the legalization of weed. This guy's been involved in the Farm Bill. He created the very first trade union in the United States for cannabis. I don't think he's still involved with that anymore, but he might be. I'm not sure. The guy is operating on every level of cannabis, and he's just always got his ear to the beat when it comes to things going on. So, Jason, what do you think about decrim? Are you working on anything right now? I know that you're which congressman were you trying to raise money for the other day?
Well, first of all, the one thing I think everyone needs to understand is that we cannot accept for anything other than full descheduling of cannabis. It's not about decriminalization. It's not about any of these other things. The reality of it is that we have to have full descheduling. Any type of rescheduling will have dire consequences to our industry as we know it today.
Amen. And it's funny that you say that, because I'm also in the cannabis industry, as some of my listeners know. And, in California, before legalization, our GDP was $30 billion in cannabis. Now, the numbers that they're reporting are $5 billion. LA lost over 20,000 jobs to legalization. Now, leave it to California politicians to figure out how legalization means more prohibition without criminality. But if we're talking about securing our position as America, the leading dominating force in cannabis globally, we have to make sure that our politicians stay out of the way. We don't have another California. We don't have another Oregon, another Colorado, another New York, God forbid. And you hit it on the head right there, Jason. And that's really what I wanted to segue in, and what Roger was talking about in his article that he wrote about the need for deschedulizing it, because if it's deschedulized, there's no regulation. We want no regulation on the cannabis.
Well, there would still be some regulation, but the problem is that any form of rescheduling would put us directly in the hands of oversight under the FDA. Exactly. And the FDA regulates everything by the molecule, not by the actual substance. And so therefore, every single product that is on a shelf in a dispensary in any state across the entire country would be deemed an illicit product with any form of rescheduling, because the FDA currently holds drug preclusion on THC for Marinol and CBD for Epidiolex. And therefore, you also have the Food, Drugs, and Cosmetic Act, and therefore every single product on the shelf would be deemed an illicit product if there was any form of rescheduling done from anywhere from 2 to any other number that you want to imagine.
Wow. Roger, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Jason. He's absolutely right. I think, in all honesty, there's a lot to criticize and a lot to praise, but there's also a lot to criticize in the Trump presidency. Matt Gaetz and I argued exactly what Jason is saying with the president in the closing days of that administration. He had a unique opportunity where, by the stroke of a pen, he could have descheduled this entirely. Didn't need the Congress. I mean, Barack Obama had both houses. Theoretically, he should have done it, could have done it, didn't do it. The idea, by the way, that and was the obstacle that we reached. People said, oh, well, the evangelicals won't approve. Look, I polled the most conservative voters in the country. Cannabis is an idea whose time has come. It's kind of like same-sex marriage, where it reaches a certain critical mass, and that came in this country as well. So this idea that the most conservative voters are opposed to this, when medicinal cannabis went on the ballot in Florida, it got 68% of the vote among Republicans. Now, the first time it went on and it fell short, just agonizingly short, because to pass a constitutional amendment, which is the only avenue available to us, we had a recalcitrant Republican state legislature just would not put this on the ballot, would not do it by legislative act, would not put it on the ballot as a constitutional amendment, which they can easily do. So to his credit, John Morgan put it on the ballot twice. The first time, there were a lot of, I think, flaws in both the actual proposal. So we left a lot to be shot at, a lot to be distorted by the opponents. And then the second time, and I give Morgan credit because he ended up putting up all the money for both of these, because there was nobody else in the industry wanted to step forward that I'm aware of. But at a minimum, we put up most of the money. But to his credit, he corrected all the flaws in the first effort in terms of the language. And this time they ran a bipartisan campaign. So you had both Republican and Democrat voices speaking out for medicinal cannabis. So this idea that the base is going to oppose, that's just not true. It's not accurate. It doesn't ever show up that way in the research. And as I say, the opioid crisis in America has inadvertently helped us enormously, because people now, I think, are beginning to understand that opioids and alcohol, for that matter, which is perfectly legal and regulated by the states, have done far more damage to individuals than cannabis could ever do.
Also, it's important to know that opioid addiction is being treated with cannabis right now as a step down. Instead of a gateway drug, it's a gateway drug to lower lower drugs. There's a famous attorney in Los Angeles, Harry Nelson, from forget the name of his law, Nelson Hardiman. I think they broke up. Nelson Fenton, I don't know. But he wrote a book, The United States of Opioids. And in this book, he talks about how cannabis is being used to treat the opioid addiction, the opioid crisis in this country. And Jason, I know that you're also working with Mark Mauser and the Republican base to bring about Republican awareness to this issue. What are some of the things that you're finding on your quest?
Well, I started working with Republicans on this issue a number of years ago. For anyone that doesn't know my history, I partnered up with Congressman Rohrabacher and became his point person on cannabis policy and messaging. Together, we came up with the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment and a host of other things. But that Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment was really the single piece of legislation that has momenticized and continually to been passed continually, which really takes the steam out of the DEA as far as an enforcement tool, because it takes the money out of their budget in order to enforce on cannabis. And so that's been the bigger thing, I think, in regards with that. But I mean, the reality of it, Adam, we just have to deschedule this plant, and Republicans are really starting to come around a lot more on this issue. I've had a number of different talks with a number of different members, and one of the things that I use to Roger, to your point with the evangelicals, is I use my personal story in regards to help with them, getting them over the fence on this, because I was not supposed to live when I was born. I had to be airlifted from Walnut Creek Hospital to San Francisco Children's Hospital because they did not have the equipment to keep me alive. They said that I would not live, and that if I did live, the whole right side of my body would be paralyzed and I would never walk. I was in an incubator for over 9 months, and I also was adopted. So I use a lot of that in regards to, I started smoking cannabis around the age of 13. Realized that it helped me with much more better mobility and function. I was born with cerebral palsy. And so once you can personalize it with them in that kind of respect.
And you've been rated 3 times as well.
Yeah, I've been rated 3 times by the DEA, once under Bush, twice under Obama, and never under Trump.
Adam, I think one of the things that you're talking about here, and the fact that it really is a galvanizing movement across both sides of the aisle. Roger spoke about the Amendment of 2 initiative in Florida. Being a native Floridian myself, I got to see Senate Bill 1030, the kind of second at bat, come forward. And they used, really manufacturing efficacious medicine, retractable epilepsy, as really putting efficacy squarely in the middle of, a conversation that both the left and right had to unite around. And as we kind of saw this logic move forward, you look at the role that regulations play in consumer goods, and it's important. It's important to me to go to the grocery store and I buy a head of lettuce. I know it doesn't have E. coli. So there's regulation in that capacity. But in the conversation around descheduling and rescheduling, I think I would agree descheduling is top right corner. That is the goal. If we live in a land of business where I spend my time, we have to get it at least rescheduled below Schedule 2. There's a thing called the 280E amendment, and it's a tax code, and it has become incredibly preventative as we've seen price pressure on this market for operators trying to provide safe access to high quality cannabinoid products. And what you're seeing is off ramps into the illicit market again. And so this great beachhead that we might have made on a legalized marketplace in the United States has become to get eroded here as we begin to see folks, not wanting to commit to, again, as Roger's saying, this evolution and something that's come its course, and now it's time to see real change.
The only reason we have an illicit market is because of prohibition. And because that all it does is we have incredibly high taxes that people have to buy in the legitimized market space, and in the illegitimate market space, you have absolutely none of that. In California alone, cannabis can be taxed anywhere, depending on what city you're buying it in, anywhere from 40 to 50%. You're paying in taxes, whether that be manufacturing taxes, local taxes of where it was produced at, local sales taxes, added on taxes from the city that you're purchasing it in, and then on top of the California state excise tax that's 15%, but is really a 27% tax because they mask it because it's based off an 80% arm's length transaction.
How can anybody stay in business under those terms? You got to come up with
and then you
hundreds
have
of thousands of dollars just to get in.
To Matthew's point.
Exactly. And guys, feel free to interrupt each other and get the conversation lively.
I guess many people don't realize this. I think the best bill in the Congress right now is HR 3105. It's a Republican bill by Congressman David Joyce of Ohio, has 9 co-sponsors. It is greatly superior to Chuck Schumer's bill, which is essentially the final corporate takeover of cannabis. One of the things that we've seen here in Florida, I'm sure Matthew noticed this, is all of the large interests who oppose cannabis legalization in any form, most of them agricultural interests, they're the first guys online to get control of it as soon as it was legalized in any form. In our initial enabling legislation, in order to grow in this state, you had to have a nursery license, and you had to be able to prove that you had had it for 30 years before you were able to get a permit to grow. Again, in the Republican legislature here was so recalcitrant that after the people voted for this in a constitutional amendment, they passed enabling administration saying, well, you could have it, but you couldn't smoke it. You could only vape it or take it in orals. Well, that discriminates against poor people. What if I can't afford a vape device? And generally speaking, as far as I have seen, the orals tend to be a bit more expensive. To his credit, again, Morgan went back into the state courts and got those provisions struck down. And he's a Democrat, but a good friend of mine. Back when I was sentenced to 7 to 9 years in prison, he wrote a letter to the judge on my behalf. So it is, the whole issue of the corporate interests who have opposed this movement from the beginning, immediately swooping in and trying to get control of it, I think is a pervasive problem, probably in every state, as far as I have seen.
You know, one time I actually had a meeting with Miriam Adelson, Sheldon Adelson's wife, the late Sheldon Adelson. And it was one of these like Republican get-togethers where everybody was talking. And I don't mind calling her out by name. And she was asking, you know, so after you're done, you know, lobbying and legislating, what do you do for income? And I told her I'm in the cannabis industry. She said, oh, I'm very passionate about the cannabis industry. I said, oh, does this mean that you're in favor of legalization? And she said, I only want Pfizer and Monsanto to control. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that the big pharma and big agriculture controls cannabis. I looked at her. I was like shocked to my heart that someone with $20 billion can say that to somebody with like me struggling to make it in the industry, that she wants to take away my livelihood, and just because she's some rich entitled princess. And, you know, for all intents and purposes, the Adelsons are really great people, but sometimes they just don't. People at
But
that,
they are so one of the number one
at that echelon,
prohibitionists
they
in the
don't get it.
country.
You know, they
Yeah,
want
absolutely.
they're
They
elitists, and they
assemblers.
don't want
Yeah.
people to, and you know, and cannabis can be the greatest economic equalizer of our time, especially now when we're in such dire straits as a country, and we need
I call it,
money.
Adam,
Jason,
I
I'm
call
sure
it the
you
new
remember
American,
this.
I
You
call it the
remember
new
back in
American
the day,
Industrial
the songs
Revolution.
overgrow the government.
Exactly.
I
Without a
mean,
doubt.
that's what we need to do right now. We need to overgrow the government.
If
Jason, to your point, kind of talking about, you know, the history of the FDA and their control with Marinol and Epidiolex, you know, it's really interesting in their breadcrumbs. If you go back and look at the history of GW Pharmaceuticals, now Jazz Pharmaceuticals, you know, Vanguard, our work is in pharmaceutical grade cannabinoids. We work with, you know, whether it's nutraceutical or pharmaceutical interests around the world. And there was a requirement for genetics in order to produce pharmaceutical grade, or what's called CGMP grade
Yep.
cannabis.
Yep.
You have to have what's called GACP, or good agricultural and collection practice, tissue culture, or starts.
Don't you have to have a FIDA certification as well?
Sure. So it's easier now than it once was, but early when GW Pharmaceuticals went to file for Epidiolex and list CBD, become registered as a drug or a novel molecule by the FDA, they had to prove that they had that tissue culture genetic. So where did it come from? And interestingly enough, there's a couple of authors that are around this. There's a book called The 15-Ounce Pound for reference, but there's actually track records of a member of Bayer, AstraZeneca, leaving the United States, moving to Amsterdam, a facility named Hortifarm getting created. When the FBI and the raids happened, that door just happened to not get knocked on. And then one of the very first efforts that GW Pharmaceutical made in their public filings is they acquired Hortifarm, which allowed them to buy those GACP genetics, which allowed them to move into a pharmaceutical drug discovery model, which put CBD where it is today.
Wow.
So again, there are ways and reasons why we've got to where we are. But, you know, it takes activists, it takes folks with political power like Roger to be in position to help us create the room to have the conversation and to discuss how do we move forward sensibly.
And it also takes businessmen like yourself. Matt, I want to ask you a question. You know, we're talking about how America can emerge as the #1 player in cannabis. And, you know, we seem to be in a consensus here that rescheduling or descheduling entirely seems to be the best option. I know that you and I had a talk last week where we were talking about in the advent where there's no regulations for 2 to 3 years, you know, pure capitalism can reign and people can make absurd profits. I know you're that Vanguard Scientific, which is an amazing company. I encourage everybody who's out in the industry, who is oil manufacturers, to be buying the Vanguard Scientific equipment, because they are truly the top level of extraction equipment on the market today. But since you're in other countries like Mexico and other countries that are developing their cannabis industries, how do you feel the U.S. is going to be able to compete? Like, do you see them providing heavy competition in Mexico? What's your assessment globally on foreign companies competing against American companies?
Sure. I think that there's a lot of different ways that I could answer that. My background's in wine and spirits, so I come from the regulated marketplace, and I do believe that, while there are issues with the 3-tier system or the tied house laws that govern the controlled substances of alcohol, a state-led regulation of products is going to be far more efficient, allowing markets to thrive versus a nationally or attempted national mandate of a marketplace. We can kind of set that aside. Internationally, what you're seeing, from at least from our experience, again, we have exposure in England, Europe, Amsterdam, Israel, New Zealand, and other markets, is there are large global pharmaceutical interests moving to solidify their margins and competitive advantage in the market. Canada was an early leader in export that enabled a lot of markets, such as Germany and others. And the export regulations that they allowed to begin to ship dry material, really helped early operators in Canada, but also allowed product manufacturers, brands, or formulation experts overseas to acquire the raw materials where they could either make recreational drugs or pharmaceutical drugs. I think that the stringency of exportation currently is driving interest to find diversion or ways around the system. And I think that ultimately there's probably tax dollars or dollars for regulation left on the table because they're not providing an international export channel for large markets.
I remember in AP US history when I was in high school, there was a lesson that we had where shortly after the Revolutionary War in this country, America was left broke, and they paid off the debts of the war by growing tobacco. And there was a movement that people were growing tobacco in their front yards and taking it to the stores and selling it. And it was really tobacco that really pulled America out of the recession of war, the Revolutionary War, and helped us get on our feet and become a nation. And I see the same thing with cannabis. And I'm personally hoping for the day where cannabis gets completely descheduled in the United States and we could be exporting to countries like Malaysia, where it's $20,000 a pound. Here pounds in California are like $500 a pound for a really good pound of marijuana, and it's $20,000 in some of these Arab countries where they kill people. So, Roger, what would you like to see as the future of cannabis in this country? What would you like to see it as a mom and pop business, deregulated? How would you envision if obviously you're very close with 45, and if he is reelected and you're one of his most trusted advisors, what would you be telling him is the correct approach?
Well, the first thing I think he needs to do is unschedule this. That's first and foremost. I think within the state framework, we have to, and I hate to deal with the free market, but we have to do something that prevents, big pharma or big agriculture, those who've opposed this at every step of the way, and who have financed the opposition, from coming in and controlling it. The other thing you have to do is you have to defeat an application. I mean, Florida, in all honesty, it is so expensive and so onerous, and you're limited to obtaining cannabis only for a very specific list of maladies. Relaxation is not one of them. A bad back is not one of them. So if you don't have one of a list of pre-approved diseases or other illnesses, you can't get it. And then beyond that, the process is extremely expensive. So you have to first go to a qualifying physician, not just any physician, not your physician, a qualifying physician. Now the qualifying physician needs your medical records. Well, that means you have to transfer them your medical records. The security of those medical records in terms of confidentiality, open to question. Now you get certified, and the doctor decides what grade of cannabis you can have based on what specific illness you are treating. Now, they may or may not give you what you want, but you get a prescription. You pay for the initial analysis. Now you pay for the prescription. Now you're qualified to go to a state dispensary where you pay for your cannabis. Now you obtain your cannabis, you use your cannabis. Now you want more cannabis. Oh, wait a minute, your prescription has expired. Now you're back to going to the qualifying position again. And these qualifying positions are like judges used to be they ride a circuit. So I'm sorry, we're only in Boca Raton on Wednesdays. I mean, so at a certain point, it occurs to me, wait a minute, I've spent $350 and I still don't have my first puff of cannabis. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go to the black market. I'm going to go down to the corner at 7-Eleven, and frankly, the shit I'm getting is much better anyway than what I'm getting at the dispensary. So it's self-defeating. It is as if the Republicans in the legislature, who never were for this, want to make it so expensive and onerous and have it be so bureaucratic that people will give up trying to get what they need. So you need a streamlined process in those states where cannabis is legal that is consumer friendly, and certainly which broadens the use, because if you don't, as I say, if you want it for relaxation, it's not available for those purposes in the state.
But Roger, you guys have a ballot initiative coming up this election cycle that would allow for the adult use consumption and purchase of cannabis in Florida. So that would kind of pretty much knock a lot of those restrictions out of the water, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
I mean, 'cause they did here in California. I mean, all the medical patients don't go get medical cards anymore here because of that.
Because it's a constitutional amendment, it requires 2/3 of the vote to be added to the Constitution. And that's a high bar. It's a very high bar.
I thought it was 60%, 60% of the vote.
Yes, essentially.
Also, occupational hazard is actually against the Constitution. And there are ways to argue occupational hazard is unconstitutional. The Institute of Justice and I came very close to getting them to commit to an occupational hazard case against some of these states and their erroneous legislating. I think someone like you, Roger, can really push that on a lot of these organizations and start suing these states for occupational hazard. Like you said, Roger, it's not just occupational hazard against the operator, it's occupational hazard against the consumer. To have to come up with $350 just to be able to buy a gram to smoke it in your house is quite ridiculous.
Well, and when you want to reload, you got to go all the way back to the beginning of the process, which makes very little sense.
But they also have a limit. They also have a limit, Roger. And so if you use more than what the state allotment allows, you're forced to go into the illicit market, even if you're purchasing in the regulated market in Florida.
That is absolutely correct. Look, many people don't know this, but my wife has recently been declared cancer-free after being diagnosed with very, very aggressive stage 4 cancer. And the guy who walked me through this, and the guy who taught me more and got me access to cannabis, which has, I think, really been responsible for my wife's recovery, is Adam King. And he didn't charge me a dime. He was sending me the medicine she needed for nothing. And it made a huge difference. And she had a terrible problem with sleep. And ultimately, she transferred over to the state legal program. But you're exactly right. So when she can no longer get an indica that allows her to sleep, we have no choice but to go to the black market. There's no other way to do it.
Exactly right.
And the black market has much more variety and options than the legal market. The legal market, at least in California, the LA went from 5,000 retail locations to 400 brick and mortar dispensaries. So if you're thinking about shelf space and it's an actual limit. Shelf space is a limited number. The more shelf space you have, the more innovation you can have at the marketplace, the more products, the more innovative strains, the more genetic breeding.
Well, to that point, the more competition, Adam. The ability for the state of Florida, for instance, if you could bring in smaller competitors that had that caregiver mentality, that were looking for specific genetics to go solve specific ailments, the conversation's broadened from THC and CBD now. We have terpenes, we have other beneficial metabolites inside of these plants. And there's this anecdotal wave of discovery now that's coming, whether it's led from Israel or otherwise, that's educating this patient, whether it be someone suffering from late stage cancer or other ailments. They're now looking for specific things, but the market's being driven by revenue, right? They're being driven by what's the impact we can make to our investor margins, not necessarily how do we best serve patients. So there's a little bit of a catch-22 there. And then when you come to the black market, they might have greater availability, but the hard part is it's kind of like the nutraceutical industry pre-regulation. There was no governance, right? So you might have fecal matter, you might have heavy metals, you might have pesticides, and unless you have that relationship with the grower and you can trust them, you don't have any assurances that you're actually getting something that's safe to combust.
But
So
no one was ever worried about that, Matthew, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s.
I can't imagine how much pesticide I smoked. I can't imagine how much.
Probably none, to be honest.
Well,
No, you probably did, because a lot of
Adam,
people
I would like to believe it, but we're in the industry, right?
Yeah.
So, there, unfortunately, the proof is in the pudding that there is, without oversight, there is a lot of negative.
But I'll tell you something, Matt. 2016 in California, you had much more innovative and higher potency products than you do today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, the potency numbers are yet to be disputed because everyone fakes their numbers.
Forget about
the
potency.
reality
I like to call it bakery weed.
Well, the reality too that
California, you have
consumers.
bakery weed. You have apple fritters and banana peanut butter and all these lemon OG and all these like bakery type weed and these heirloom strains, these landrace strains like the heavy indicas and the Afghani Kushes and the sativas on the other side, like your Durban poisons. You don't see those at the market anymore.
A lot of those genetics have died out and gone away. Like skunk number 1, all right, was amazing. Okay, when you
Northern
walk
Lights.
into a room, like those strains are died out, gone, and probably never going to see them again.
That's a damn shame, because if we're talking about medicinal impact,
Well, that's what prohibition. People couldn't hold on to the genetics. There were no tissue culture labs back then for people to be able to go and bank their strains in a safe space, and so therefore we lose that part of the culture.
You don't think there's any Northern Lights left around?
I mean, I haven't found it. There's people that may say it's Northern Lights, but I'll tell you what, the Northern Lights I used to see back in the day ain't nothing like what they're calling Northern Lights now. So I call that all fake news.
Oh, I used to love the weed that we would have back in high school. Alaskan Thunderfuck, Cat Piss. Oh man, there were so many good ones, and now today it's all the same stuff. Everything's been monotonized and that gets us to a really good question, something that is outside of the realm of politics and scope. What is your favorite strain? Guys, I'll start with you. Roger, do you have a favorite strain?
I like a strain out of California called Blue Cheese. That's my favorite strain.
Yeah.
California cannabis for the win.
Yeah, blue cheese, man. There's something about that odor. When you open a bag of blue cheese, you know you got blue cheese. What about you, Matt? You got a favorite strain?
I respect the cheese reference from Roger. Yeah, those queso genetics are beneficial and very good. I like anything with high terpene content, terpenoline, like Jack Herer, some of those original crosses. The J1, Jason, skunk number 1 cross with Jack. That's a great, stay focused, stay up, maybe you can enjoy your homework a little bit more kind of thing.
I'm working on a new strain that'll come out of Yorba Linda, California that we call Tricky Dick. Look for it. I think you're going to like it.
Oh, yeah.
All right, care packages.
Jason, what about
I
you?
love it. Yeah.
What's your strain?
You know me, I only smoke the best weed in the world. So whatever I'm smoking at the time is the best weed in the world. But a majority of the time I am smoking OG Kush, which is the superior cannabis strain of them all.
I got to say this because Jason and I have hung out a lot. Usually when I hang out with my friends, it's me who's rolling the joints. It's me who's providing the weed. But whenever I hang out with Jason, I always make sure that
it's
Jason's
the opposite.
the guy who's taking the bill for the bar.
Yes, we got you covered, Adam.
But that's important, and I think that the market really misses those heirloom strains. You can't really find those the cheese.
I'll give you a good example because I think you are right in some regards on this. I had a strain that came from an up north brand called State Flower, and the strain was called Lamb's Bread. And I hadn't seen Lamb's Bread in I don't know how long. Okay. And I literally started getting people that were literally searching Lamb's Bread on Weed Maps and coming into the store. Brand new customers, never been in the store ever before, but only came in because we had Lamb's Bread on the shelf.
Jason, where is your store? Give a shout out to the shop.
Yes, you can find me in West Hollywood at 7828 Santa Monica Boulevard, Oz in West Hollywood, the oldest dispensary south of San Francisco in the state of California. And I am the longest continuous retail operator of cannabis in the United States of America.
Jason, I think to your point, The issue here is we're looking at, they call it factory weed, right?
Yeah.
Or production specifically grown for, revenue. Specific genetics flower quicker. They're less volatile. They require less special treatments, whether it's a nutrient regimen or otherwise. So as you're looking for companies that are trying to just meet a market demand of supply and demand, regardless of quality, you're finding a big fall off on these unique genetics that might take longer to flower.
Most people don't grow them anymore. Most people don't grow them anymore because it's not cost productive, because of the high rate of rent, high rate of power, high cost of labor. All of those different things, really, like if you can't flower a plant in 6 to 8 weeks, that genetic is not being grown anymore from a production angle.
So exactly right. In my background from wine and spirits, you can look at a small producer like Nickel and Nickel in California. Well, they make a very special Pinot and they allocate only a certain amount of grapes to it. They have an ability to sell to a national market. They can ship across state lines, so they get to specialize. Some of these, like you said, Adam, some of these bakery genetics or some of these really specialized plant, if they had an ability to access a wider buyer base, they could focus on that really special, unique proposition that is their cannabis genetics. And that whole side of the economy is being stymied.
That's why we need to deschedule cannabis, because so then that way we can open up interstate trade. California is the #1 brand in cannabis in the entire world. California has been supplying the world with its cannabis for the last 80 years. And there's no reason that we shouldn't be doing it now and generating the tax revenue off of it for our country.
As of now, we should be able, states with medical policies should be able to sell between each other. You
have to have descheduling in order to do that.
The Commerce Clause of the Constitution
cannot move a
clearly
controlled substance across
does not
state lines.
allow for our states to ban other states' produce and products in their own state.
The produce and products aren't controlled substances, Adam.
Right. Good point. So
that's why we have to have descheduling of cannabis, not a rescheduling,
and we have to stay
but a
away from
descheduling.
legalization.
Legalization is just a soundbite. It means absolutely nothing.
No, it doesn't mean nothing. It means something. It means that regulators can come in and create
Cannabis is legalized now, but would you consider it legalized?
What it was?
Cannabis is considered legal now. Would you consider it legalized?
No. It's
exactly. That's why I said. That's why I said. That's why I said.
Worse.
It's nothing more than a soundbite. That's why you
legalization
have to have
is another means by which the government can come in and regulate cannabis. We don't want legalization. We want descheduling of the
descheduling. Open up the market.
I think we're all in agreement. Look, here's my fondest dream, that Trump would return to the White House and I could convince him to deschedule cannabis, and that the Trump organization, the family, would go into the business and introduce a strain called Jared Kushner.
Yes. I'm with you on that, Roger, and I'm happy to help you with that in the fight to do that in any way possible.
Guys, I want to pivot really quick because I want to touch on public cannabis companies. It seems like any company that goes public gets shorted by these Wall Street elite hedge funds like Citadel and BlackRock. It's almost like this. If you look at Tilray, if you look at Canopy, look at all these big companies that were supposed to have these huge IPOs and they actually have real assets. What is going on in the public offerings of cannabis companies that are causing every single one of them to crash so heavily?
Well, first of all, they're on the Canadian market space. The second one is they have such a high tax liability rate that it's actually cheaper for them to forego paying their IRS payments as opposed to borrowing cash or to borrowing money because of the cost of capital currently, and the fact that we don't have safe banking. Just for a starter pack for you, Adam.
I think that early days bubble economics was a big piece of it, a frothy intention for gold rush. I think now if you look at some of the more sophisticated 10K filings, you've got two issues. One, there's a lot of roll-ups happening, in the post-SPAC era. So you're seeing assets get acquired that might not be usable. They might not be meeting the needs. And a lot of times those facilities have been built and purchased using untenable lease arrangements. These lease buyback agreements in which the operators could never make their payments. Businesses are built by creating a pro forma. This is a forecast of how much money I can make. Well, in early days, the bankers didn't know that the pound wasn't going to be worth $3,000 every year. And they didn't know that every plant wasn't going to produce 3 pounds. So the underlying economics that build up these potential forecast revenues are shaky at best. And so I think that on a whole, you have the unrealistic projections. So as you file your returns against expectation, you're falling short, causing for devaluation. And then those companies that are seeking to increase their asset bases might be acquiring disparate assets that don't necessarily 1 + 1 isn't equaling more than 2. And in that way, I think you're finding some issues currently as the market's stabilizing.
You think any of those companies are going to belly up and get bought out by bigger companies as their tickers are so low right now?
I think that, I think that the biggest one that was out there on wheels was Canopy back in the day, Canopy Growth Holdings. I think it's unique to see Constellation Brands, in their position. Those are all Boston Consulting Group experts. So, when they
Constellation Corona.
Yep.
Yeah, Constellation's the largest conglomerate of beverage, wine, and spirits globally by a long shot. And, they have a playbook. They have an intention, whether it's cannabis-infused products or understanding how they're going to meet their current retailers' demands for product SKUs on the shelf. And they're probably working back from an agenda. Carrying a bunch of underperforming assets, I don't see as a part of that. And the cost to file because of the banking issues, like Jason mentioned, are becoming
I want to talk a little. It was mentioned. I think Roger, you mentioned it, is how to limit these mega pharmaceutical companies and massive players. I'd like to make one suggestion, and seeing that you might have the president's ear sometime soon, what we need is a moratorium on companies that paid for prohibition, that they cannot be, that some sort of maybe 30, 40, 50-year moratorium where they're barred from the industry. Big tobacco, big pharma, big alcohol, as Matt just mentioned. Constellation is the largest player right now in the game. They're just an alcohol company. A lot of these people put up significant dollars to regulate and criminalize cannabis, ruining the lives of millions of Americans. A father who goes to prison isn't one life ruined. It's everybody in their family's life ruined. So I was wondering, maybe Roger, you could speak on that. What do you think about something like that?
Look, I'm not an attorney, but I also don't know about the constitutionality of that. This speaks to a larger problem, which is that big money and the influence that it buys still works extraordinarily effectively in our legislative and executive process. I mean, I worked as a lobbyist. It's been 30 years now, but even then, if you had enough money and you could employ the right lobbyists, usually on a bipartisan basis, you could pretty much buy whatever you wanted. And there is no way to divorce money from the political process, because I agree with the Supreme Court decision that money is speech. So there's the larger problem. It's not just this industry, it's every industry. Mm-hmm. And the big players who can afford the most expensive, most connected lobbyists, and this includes certain foreign governments, can get their way in our state capitals and in our federal capitals. I don't profess to have a solution for you that is legal and constitutional, because I don't. But that's really the genesis of the problem. We certainly saw that in Florida, where as soon as this became legal, immediately the most heavyweight lobbyists in Tallahassee swooped in to grab control of it and try to wire it for their clients. It's a broken system. It's just better than any other system anyplace else on the face of the earth. That's all.
For now.
And I think that, Adam, the fine line here between big pharma and being able to provide a competitive product, for the everyday operator, really gets down to, again, current good manufacturing practices. And there is, okay, I can manufacture a pharmaceutical drug, and that's this bar here, or I can manufacturing something that I have a chance to sell into my local grocer. I think that generally recognized as safe, food standards to meet products are a bar that can be achievable by an operator. I'm going to open a restaurant. I'm going to open, perhaps a dispensary. I think that sort of commercial viability is realistic. You have to have some sort of capability to operate inside of a regulated market. For instance, if you look at what's happened with the Delta 8 initiatives, the Farm Bill has enabled hemp CBD to be brought into market, but now because of the industriousness of the industry, they're using a novel process to create a psychoactive component, Delta 8, that was never even understood to be around. And you find convenience stores selling Delta 8 products, untested, potentially full of heavy metals, with packaging that may or may not speak to a younger than 18 or 21 buyer market. So
there was just a case in Virginia where a kid ate a Delta 8 gummy and ultimately ended up dying. I don't think it was necessarily from the Delta 8 gummy, but the news media is definitely trying to portray it that way.
Right. So by non-regulation in its entirety, the industry's kind of opens itself up to some of that marijuana ancient, this
reefer madness.
Yeah. And so as stewards of the industry, I think it's important that we respect and honor the importance of being safe for consumers, but at the same time, not upregulating this to a point where only the Pfizers of the world get a chance to participate because of preventative costs.
Which is why we have to deschedule cannabis.
It's very clear that if you look at the marketplace in California today, innovation is really found in the black market, not in the legal market. And that's because when you have these huge regulatory agencies controlling it, giving it to private interests, like California's like this test zone, micro center test zone, innovation is stifled. Companies like mine don't get a chance to really take up shelf space, and innovative products, innovative solutions. If you have $250,000 lying around and you want to go into cannabis, if you want to come up with a novel patented idea or very proprietary idea, it's going to cost you $250,000 to implement that proprietary nature. It's also going to cost you $250,000 to get a license. So you have to choose between this one or this one, and then that's, do you go on the license and try to hustle your way up to proprietary business? Or do you start in proprietary business on the black market? You get shut down, you can just move locations, and you don't have the excess burdens of excess taxes. And the market is 90% bigger than the 90% of the cannabis market is non-licensed.
Adam, or you could just find a manufacturer to white label the product for you.
Also, like Jason Beck out in Cathedral City is ready, willing, and able to manufacture anything.
We're more than happy to manufacture products.
All right. Well, we're wrapping up this show, getting to the end. I want to, last words on cannabis. Where do you see the biggest opportunities? What do you see as the biggest pitfalls? Where do you want to go with this? Matt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, a lot of the effort that we're spending right now is harmonizing standards on the national lab level. I'm a part of the National Lab Council that's put together, which is a great organization of testing labs that work together and bring forward recommendations. They submitted a white paper earlier this year, but globally, if we can provide standards of ingredient specification to allow US-based ingredients to travel internationally to contract manufacturers, be it nutraceutical, food, or pharmaceuticals, we still retain the genetic intellectual properties. We still retain that white collar, high IP value mentality that America's already led with. And we can let the other markets continue to follow us, whether it's productization, formulation, or just overall market practices.
So you believe America leads through genetics?
I think they have the opportunity to.
Well, Israel's already leading that though? So we're not even the leader in that space right now.
I think that what's being done at the Technion and Hebrew University is incredible. And Dr. Lumir Hanus and what Dr. Raphael Meshulam are doing are wonderful, but they're open for commercial collaboration. And the amount of square footage under production is second nowhere in the world to the US. So taking those genetics and those bright minds and those best practices and then bringing them to market so the patients can benefit from them and then telling that story back out. I think it's a synergistic story, Jason.
Jason, as we're closing out the segment, what do you feel in your last words? I also want to see what as an operator and activist and so deeply impassioned in the business, what could be done to help American business in this new world of cannabis? What do you think is going to help American hegemony in cannabis?
The only thing that's going to help cannabis or the industry or America is full descheduling. That's it. There is no in-betweens. There is no workarounds. There is no whatever. We have to have full descheduling. We have to have a fair and open market space. And that's why I'm a big supporter of Nancy Mace's bill that she has introduced, that I know Amazon has backed, and I know the Koch's back. And that is the only bill in place that would deschedule cannabis and open up the marketplace across all 50 states, and really would really be the new start of the new American industrial revolution. Secondly, on the hemp side, I really want the hemp industry to really be investing in manufacturing of goods that we can produce here in America instead of always outsourcing all of our products to China. We need to be manufacturing our own paper. We need to be manufacturing our own pencils for kids at school. We need to be doing all of this with hemp. And that is the reality of what we need to be doing. And that could be the new American industrial revolution right there, and to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States of America.
Absolutely.
That's a very good point. And Roger, to close out our segment, how do you feel in relation to all this? What could be done? What are you doing? What is the number one thing that you see the most important thing in cannabis? Is it such an important issue to you?
Here's what I want to do, Adam. I just want to be like Snoop Dogg. I just want to license my name for a new strain to be called Roger Stoned. There you have it.
We can do that, Roger. We can help you with that.
Doing it right now.
We can do that. That's easy. Yes.
Between the three of us, we between Matt, Jason, and I, we got.
Because one thing I do know how to do is market, brother. That I know how to do.
That is true. And Roger, I gotta say, I am so grateful that you're on this panel with us, because, like I said in the beginning of the show, it is so nice to hear your opinions on something other than Trump and J6 and all this stuff. You are such a smart man. You're so wise and you're so experienced. You've been in so many administrations, so much hands-on experience in our country, and you're so underutilized as a thinker. And so I want to thank you for coming on the show and lending your opinion to something out of your wheelhouse. It's very refreshing. So thank you for that.
Happy to be here. Look, I'm just an advocate. I'm very impressed with the knowledge of everybody here on your panel. This is an important fight, because I saw the role of cannabis in my wife's own recovery. I reiterate that Adam is a mensch for what he did for us, just a mensch, because I wouldn't have had access or knowledge of what I needed when that crucial time came. And she had her birthday last week. She's doing amazingly well. Amazing. The doctor told us she had zero chance of recovery, zero chance of remission, zero chance of going back to living a normal life. And of course, they were wrong. They were completely wrong. And I think the cannabis products, which have strong anti-cancer properties, made a crucial difference in her recovery. So I want to thank you again, Adam.
You're welcome. I make a very specialized formula for any listeners who are out there who are suffering with cancer or any disease and they want to try some of our cancer formulations. You can write to info@theadamkingshow.com, and I would happily send out products to anybody. I didn't just send them to you because you're a famous guy, Roger. We send products all the time for free to patients, and we actually just started a brand called Mama Bear's Honey Pot, and this is for people who are suffering. So thank you for the endorsement on those products. And cancer is our family. We had intimate members of our family go through cancer, and one thing that I learned in cancer, it is curable. It is not a death sentence the way that big pharma wants it to be a death sentence. It keeps the value up, but it means a lot. Thank you, Roger, for those shout outs for our products and what we do. On that note, I'm going to close out the segment. I want to thank our unbelievable guests, Matt Anderson from Vanguard Scientific, Jason Beck from AHHS, and Roger Stone from the Stone Zone and everything Roger Stone. To thank you for all the listeners out there, and you know where to reach us every single week. On that note, I'm going to say goodbye, and we will be back later this week. We have LA City Council races coming up on Thursday, Friday. Stay tuned for that show where we're going to have Sam Yabri, candidate for LA City Council. Hopefully we'll clean up the mess there. And I will be talking to LA City Council on the show about cannabis, which is a good segment from this last show. So again, thank you to my guests. Thank you to my listeners. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Stay safe on Thanksgiving. And just remember that the scariest Thanksgiving. What am I? I'm not even stoned. I'm not stoned and I'm not Joe Biden. Why am I stumbling like this? On Halloween, everybody, stay safe on Halloween. And just remember the scariest thing on Halloween is big government. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you. God bless.